Lee Rigby was a 25-year-old British soldier, a dedicated father, and a passionate drummer with the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. Having served in Afghanistan, Rigby had returned to the UK and was stationed at the Woolwich Barracks in southeast London. He wasn't a high-ranking officer, nor was he involved in the politics of war. On that day, he was simply a man on his way home, dressed in a Help for Heroes hoodie, symbolizing his support for wounded veterans. His brutal murder, carried out in broad daylight on a London street, would come to symbolize the senselessness and cruelty of modern-day terrorism. The attackers, Michael Adebolajo, 28, and Michael Adebowale, 22, were both British-born men of Nigerian descent who had converted to Islam in their youth. Though they lived seemingly ordinary lives in South London, both had developed deep-rooted extremist views. Adebolajo, in particular, had drawn the attention of intelligence services after he was detained in Kenya in 2010 while allegedly attempting to join the jihadist group Al-Shabaab, which is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. He was deported back to the UK, but no charges were brought, a failure that would later spark public outrage and scrutiny of MI5's oversight. Driven by a warped sense of justice, the pair claimed they were acting as soldiers of Islam, retaliating against the British military's involvement in Muslim countries such as Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. In their eyes, Lee Rigby, as a British soldier, represented a legitimate target, even though he was unarmed, off-duty, and alone. Their justification echoed chillingly in the video, filmed just moments after the murder, where one of them, blood still on his hands, declared, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." It was not an act of spontaneous rage. It was a calculated public execution carried out to shock, provoke, and send a message of terror. At around 2:20 p.m. on 22 May 2013, the streets of Woolwich in southeast London bustled with ordinary life. It was a typical spring afternoon, quiet, uneventful. Among the pedestrians was Fusilier Lee Rigby, a 25-year-old British soldier making his way back to the barracks. Dressed in a Help for Heroes sweatshirt, he was instantly recognizable as a serviceman, but unarmed, relaxed, and unsuspecting. As he crossed Artillery Place, a blue Vauxhall Tigra suddenly swerved off the road and accelerated directly into him, throwing him to the ground with brutal force. What followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. Two men emerged from the vehicle armed with a meat cleaver, a kitchen knife, and an intent that shocked bystanders to their core. Without hesitation, they descended upon Rigby and began a savage attack in full view of the public. Eyewitnesses later recalled the sheer ferocity of the assault. They didn't stop. It was like they were butchering an animal. But perhaps more disturbing than the violence itself was what came next. The two assailants did not flee. Instead, they remained at the scene, standing beside Rigby's lifeless body. One of them, later identified as Michael Adebolajo, turned to a bystander holding a phone and spoke directly into the camera, his hands drenched in blood, a cleaver still in his grip. "You people will never be safe," he declared calmly. "Remove your governments, they don't care about you. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." It was a chilling message broadcast by ITV News and replayed across the nation within hours. The image of a man soaked in blood calmly justifying a public execution on a London street sent shockwaves through the UK. In that moment, terrorism had taken on a new terrifying form, not hidden in the shadows, but brazenly staged in the open, for all the world to see. For over 10 minutes after the attack, the two assailants remained at the scene, pacing near Rigby's mutilated body, engaging passers-by, even posing for onlookers' phones. By the time armed police units arrived, it was clear this was no attempt at escape. Instead, the two men began walking deliberately towards officers, still gripping their bloodied weapons, one of them brandishing what appeared to be a handgun. As the pair advanced, refusing to comply with verbal commands, officers had no choice. A volley of gunfire rang out. Both men were shot multiple times, collapsing to the pavement just meters from where they had murdered Lee Rigby. Medics rushed to stabilize them on site before they were taken under armed guard to separate hospitals. They had survived and would stand trial. The attack, so brazen and public, sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. This wasn't a hidden plot foiled in the dark. It was an execution in broad daylight, recorded, explained, and then broadcast. Across the country, a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief gripped the public. For many, the sheer visibility of the crime and the fact that the victim was a British soldier made it feel like a direct assault on the nation itself. In the hours that followed, protests erupted, particularly from far-right groups such as the English Defence League (EDL), who marched through towns and cities, chanting anti-Muslim slogans. Mosques were targeted, online hate speech surged, and community tensions ran dangerously high. In contrast, Muslim leaders across the UK condemned the murder, calling it a betrayal of Islam's core values and warning of collective blame. Inside 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister David Cameron convened an emergency Cobra meeting that evening. Intelligence agencies were ordered to review their files. It soon emerged that both attackers were already known to MI5, and one, Michael Adebolajo, had even been arrested abroad on suspicion of terrorist activity. How, the public asked, had such men been allowed to roam freely? The media descended with relentless force. BBC, Sky News, CNN, Al Jazeera, and every major outlet broadcasted near constant coverage. The ITV news footage of Adebolajo speaking with blood on his hands became one of the most widely circulated terror images of the decade. Social media exploded. For many, it was their first realization that terrorism in Britain no longer wore masks or planned in secret. It had taken to the streets in plain sight, armed with knives and a mobile phone camera. What followed was not just a criminal investigation, but a national reckoning. Trust in the intelligence services was shaken. The conversation on radicalization, community integration, and lone wolf terror shifted overnight. The murder of Lee Rigby had not just taken one life, it had altered the UK's perception of domestic terrorism forever. In the weeks that followed the murder, a deeper picture of systemic failure began to emerge. Both Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale were already known to British intelligence services. In particular, Adebolajo had been on MI5's radar for years, flagged for his radical beliefs, associations with extremist preachers, and previous attempt to travel to Somalia via Kenya, where he was detained in 2010. What alarmed many was the revelation that MI5 had tried to recruit him as an informant, offering him money and protection if he agreed to work as a covert asset inside radical circles. He refused. Yet despite his known extremism, he was released without charge and allowed to return to the UK, where his activities seemingly continued without meaningful intervention. Critics would later describe it as a catastrophic lapse in preemptive security, a missed opportunity that might have prevented a national tragedy. By November 2013, the case went before a jury at the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court. Security was intense, plainclothes, officers armed patrols, and bomb sweeps secured the courthouse daily. Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale were both charged with the murder of Lee Rigby and the attempted murder of police officers, as well as terrorism-related offenses. During the trial, Adebolajo remained defiant, declaring in open court that he was a soldier of Allah and that killing Rigby was an act of war, not murder. He showed no remorse, calmly describing the attack as necessary in retaliation for British military actions overseas. Adebowale was more subdued, but offered little in the way of defense. Prosecutors presented CCTV footage, eyewitness accounts, forensic reports, and the now infamous ITV video as irrefutable evidence. Inside the courtroom, the Rigby family sat through harrowing testimony, including descriptions of the wounds inflicted on their son. At times, family members and jurors were visibly shaken, with court officials offering support for trauma and distress. The verdict was unanimous. Both men were found guilty. On the 26th of February 2014, sentencing was delivered. Michael Adebolajo received a whole-life tariff, meaning he will never be eligible for parole, the harshest sentence under UK law. Michael Adebowale was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 45 years before eligibility for release. But justice did not end the story. The public inquiry and subsequent parliamentary review led to a re-evaluation of how lone actor terrorism was understood and countered in Britain. In 2015, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act was passed, granting new powers for monitoring and intervening in radicalization, particularly among youth and in prisons. The government also overhauled its PREVENT program, which had previously been criticized as either too soft or too intrusive. Resources were redirected toward early intervention, community-based education, and de-radicalization initiatives. The MI5 was urged to refine its assessment models for individuals already known to pose ideological risk. Meanwhile, the name Lee Rigby became more than just a victim's. He became a symbol of military service, of national unity in the face of terror, and of the price paid when extremism is allowed to fester unchecked. A charitable foundation, the Lee Rigby Foundation, was established in his memory to support bereaved military families and promote peace-building initiatives. In Woolwich and beyond his face remains etched on murals, plaques, and hearts. The trial may have ended in convictions, but the case of Lee Rigby marked a watershed moment in British counter-terrorism history, exposing vulnerabilities, igniting debates, and reshaping the landscape of domestic security for years to come.